Welcome to Top 10 Secret, where we uncover the most chilling and mysterious tales. Today, step into the world of the supernatural with our top 10 spine-chilling ghost hunter stories, filled with haunting encounters and mind-bending battles against otherworldly forces you won't want to miss. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Story 1. The Legend of the Soul Hunter. In a nameless land, where sunlight was nothing but a faint memory, legend spoke of an ancient entity known as the Soul Hunter. It was neither human nor beast. It was the embodiment of hatred, of endless darkness, and of the deepest curses hidden within the human soul. In a remote village on the edge of a dead forest, where the trees were blackened, leafless, and lifeless, lived a young girl named Lyra. Her entire life was shrouded in poverty and the pain of loss. One by one, her loved ones had disappeared over the years. Her parents were murdered by a band of mercenaries when she was a child, and her brother was swept away by the tide of war, never to return. But the worst came when the mercenaries returned to the village. They didn't just loot. They burned everything to the ground and took all the women, including Lyra. That night, she was dragged away in terror and fury, imprisoned in a damp warehouse amid the screams and cries of other women. No one came to rescue them, and the village was left in ashes. In her despair, Lyra recalled an ancient legend her grandmother had once told her. It was the story of the Soul Hunter, a being that could only be summoned with blood and pure hatred. They said that once this entity appeared, nothing could stop it from delivering its justice in its own way. But in return, the soul of the summoner would be bound forever in darkness. With nothing left to lose, Lyra used a rusty piece of metal to cut her palm. Blood dripped down as she drew a strange symbol on the dirty ground. This symbol, etched into her memory from her grandmother's tales, was the key to summoning the Soul Hunter. She whispered curses in an ancient language her grandmother had taught her. At first, nothing happened. But then the room began to shake. The air grew thick, cold, and suffocating. A colossal shadow appeared, accompanied by the sound of grinding metal and the wails of thousands of trapped souls. It stood before her, a towering warrior wearing an iron helmet shaped like a pyramid, etched with haunting symbols. In its hand was a massive, heavy axe inscribed with strange runes. It said nothing, made no sound, but Lyra could feel the dark power emanating from it, engulfing the entire room. As soon as it appeared, the Soul Hunter began its mission. It stepped out of the warehouse, each footstep resonating like the toll of a death knell. The mercenaries, laughing and drinking around a campfire outside, were oblivious. It wasn't until the axe cleaved through the air and a head rolled to the ground that they realized death had come. No resistance could stand against the Soul Hunter. It moved like a ghost, swift and merciless. Its axe didn't just cut flesh, it tore apart the souls of its victims. Screams echoed through the forest, lasting until everything fell silent. By dawn, only scattered remnants of bodies remained, and strange chains emerged from the ground, as if to bind the souls of the slain. Lyra thought it was over. She believed that by summoning the Soul Hunter, she had avenged her family and village. But she was wrong. The price of vengeance did not end with the souls of her enemies. A week after the massacre, Lyra began seeing strange figures in the darkness. At first, they were just faint whispers, fleeting glances. But then, they became clearer. They were the dead, not just the mercenaries, but also her loved ones. They didn't smile, didn't welcome her. Instead, they cursed her. "Why did you summon it? Why did you let our souls be chained forever?" They cried in agony. Lyra didn't understand until another figure appeared. It was her grandmother. "Lyra, you have made the greatest mistake of your life. You summoned it, but you didn't understand that it doesn't just hunt the wicked. Once summoned, it hunts everyone." Lyra panicked. She fled the village, but nowhere was far enough to escape the darkness. Invisible chains began to bind her mind. Every night, she dreamed of being dragged into an abyss where thousands of souls screamed in torment. In the end, Lyra could endure no more. One night, she returned to the place where she had summoned the soul hunter. She wanted to pay the price, to reclaim peace. But it didn't listen. It stood there, silent, and raised its axe. As the axe descended, Lyra didn't scream. She felt everything fade away, the pain, the hatred, and even her existence. The next morning, those who survived in the area heard the sound of chains dragging through the wind. On the ground, the summoning symbol was etched deep into the earth, and a new legend was born. They said the soul hunter was no longer just an entity. It was a collection of all the souls that had ever summoned it. And from then on, it no longer hunted only the wicked. It hunted anyone who dared to challenge the balance of life and death. But the story didn't end there. The legend warned that anyone who heard the sound of chains in the night should leave immediately, for it was a sign that the soul hunter was near. One night, a family in another village, dismissing the tale as mere folklore, chose to stay. The heavy footsteps, the clashing metal echoed through the dark. The father, clutching a small axe, stepped out to face the darkness. But what he saw wasn't an enemy of flesh and blood. It was the soul hunter, with hollow eyes and a blood-drenched axe. None of the family survived to tell the tale. The next morning, neighbors found the house empty, with strange symbols carved into the walls and hundreds of chains suspended mid-air. These chains didn't remain still. They moved slowly, as if hunting for prey. From that day on, every night in the desolate lands, people could hear the sound of chains echoing from afar. No one dared to believe they were safe, for the soul hunter no longer hunted only those who summoned it. It hunted the weak, the wandering souls. Story 2. The Keeper of Eternal Winter. In a forgotten realm, where winter never ended and silence reigned supreme, tales were whispered of a ghastly figure known as the Keeper of Eternal Winter. He was neither man nor beast, but a specter of unending cold, loneliness, and despair. Shrouded in a fur coat as pale as death, he sat upon his throne, smoking a cigarette that exhaled spirals of chilling smoke, his hollow eyes gazing into the void. His presence was a curse, and his story, a harbinger of madness. The land of Erythrea was once a thriving kingdom of lush forests and warm summers. But 100 years ago, the warmth was stolen, replaced by an unrelenting frost. Crops failed, rivers froze, and despair blanketed the hearts of its people. Legends spoke of a curse that bound the land to the icy grasp of an immortal figure. This figure was said to reside in a castle carved from black ice, high atop a desolate mountain, watching over the endless winter. The villagers feared him. They claimed that anyone who dared ascend the mountain to confront him never returned, their screams lost in the howling winds. Yet desperation breeds courage. Alina, a young woman whose family had succumbed to starvation and cold, was left with nothing but her will to survive. One fateful night, beneath a moon that hung like a cold eye in the sky, she decided to seek the truth. If there was even the faintest chance to end the winter, she would take it, even if it cost her soul. The journey to the mountain was perilous. The wind howled with a voice of its own, carrying whispers of anguish and despair. The path twisted through forests of skeletal trees, their branches reaching like the claws of the damned. As Alina ascended, she began to feel an unnatural chill, a cold that gnawed at her bones and numbed her thoughts. The first sign of the castle was its spires, piercing the sky like jagged teeth. As she approached, Alina noticed something that froze her blood more than the wind. Statues, countless and lifelike, scattered along the path. They were villagers, frozen in time, their faces contorted in terror. Each step forward felt heavier, as if the very ground sought to devour her courage. Finally, she reached the gates of the castle. They groaned open with a sound like a dying scream, revealing a cavernous hall lit by flickering candles. The air reeked of decay and ash. At the far end of the hall sat the figure she had heard of only in fearful whispers. The keeper was an imposing figure, draped in a fur coat so pale it seemed woven from the fog of death itself. His skeletal hands, adorned with intricate eldritch tattoos, held a smoldering cigarette. He exhaled a cloud of smoke, which swirled unnaturally, forming grotesque faces that dissipated with faint cries. "Why have you come?" His voice was like ice cracking, deep and resonant, each word stabbing into Alina's mind. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stepped forward. "I've come to end this winter. You have stolen the lives of my family, my friends, my village. I demand you lift this curse." The keeper chuckled, a sound that echoed like nails scraping glass. "Stolen? Foolish girl. I do not create this winter. I merely keep it." He leaned forward, his hollow eyes gleaming with malice. "Do you wish to take my place?" Alina recoiled, her resolve faltering. "What do you mean?" The keeper rose from his throne, towering over her. "This winter is eternal, bound to this land by a force beyond mortal comprehension. I am but its vessel, its warden. To end the winter, someone must bear the burden. Someone must become me." Alina was torn. To end the suffering of countless lives, she would have to relinquish her own, condemning herself to an eternity of isolation and despair. Yet, could she turn away, knowing the land would remain frozen and lifeless? "If I take your place," she asked, her voice trembling, "what will happen to you?" The keeper's lips curled into a faint smile. "I will be free, child. Free to fade into the oblivion I have long craved." After a long silence, Alina nodded. "I accept." The keeper extended a skeletal hand, and as she took it, an unbearable cold surged through her. Her body stiffened, her breath caught, and she felt her soul being ripped from her mortal shell. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was the keeper's smile as his form dissolved into mist. When Alina awoke, she was seated upon the throne. Her hands were no longer flesh but bone, etched with the same unholy runes as her predecessor. The fur coat now draped her shoulders, and the cigarette rested between her fingers. She exhaled, and the smoke carried the same haunting faces. Outside, the first rays of sunlight pierced the sky. The ice began to thaw, rivers flowed once more, and the land stirred with life. Villagers emerged from their homes, marveling at the warmth they had not felt in decades. But deep within the castle, Alina's hollow eyes watched from the shadows. Though the land was free, the price was steep. Alina's name became a forgotten echo, and her existence turned into legend. Yet on the coldest nights, when the wind howled like a dying scream, some claimed they could see her figure in the castle's high window, smoking, her gaze fixed on eternity. Those who dared venture near the mountain spoke of statues that lined the path, each more lifelike than the last. And on rare occasions, a new statue would appear, its face frozen in terror, as if caught in its final futile plea. The keeper of eternal winter lives on, a silent warden of frost and despair. And so the curse remains, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to seek the truth. Story 3. The Lady of the Swamp. In a small, secluded village surrounded by dark forests and endless swamplands, a chilling legend was told. The Lady of the Swamp. Her true name was lost to time, But those who strayed too close to the cursed waters under the cold, silver moon never returned. They said she was a spirit consumed by rage and sorrow, forever clutching a dripping skull, a haunting reminder of the vengeance she carried. Centuries ago, the swamp was a lush, vibrant land where villagers thrived. But one fateful night, a young woman named Lila was accused of witchcraft. Her beauty, some said, had bewitched the village's men, drawing them into the depths of the swamp, never to be seen again. Others claimed she whispered forbidden incantations under the moonlight. The fearful villagers, driven by superstition and hatred, dragged her to the swamp under the pale light of a full moon. They bound her to a stake and set it aflame. As the fire consumed her, Lila's screams echoed through the night, her voice filled with curses. "You will all suffer," she cried. "I will return, and the swamp will be your grave." As the flames turned her body to ash, the waters of the swamp rippled unnaturally. The wind carried her final vengeful wail far and wide, and from that moment, the swamp became a place of death and despair. Generations passed, and the village fell into ruin. Only a few stubborn families remained, living in constant fear of the swamp. On moonlit nights, they swore they could hear soft whispers carried on the wind, a woman's voice calling out, beckoning. Many dared to enter the swamp, lured by curiosity, greed, or the hope of disproving the legend. None returned. Days later, their belongings would wash up on the swamp's edge, and faint, distant screams would haunt the villagers' dreams. The swamp itself seemed alive. The twisted, gnarled trees formed grotesque shapes, their roots reaching like claws into the murky water. The air was thick with decay, and the silence was broken only by the occasional splash, or a distant, blood-curdling laugh. One fateful night, under the light of a full moon, a group of villagers decided to confront the legend. Led by a young man named Liam, they armed themselves with torches, blades, and a talisman blessed by the village elder. Liam, a skeptic, believed the tales were nothing more than exaggerated folklore. "We'll prove it's just a swamp," he declared as they ventured into the dense marsh. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became. The water beneath their feet grew colder, and an unnatural mist began to rise. The talisman in Liam's hand grew warm, almost burning, as if trying to warn them. Suddenly, the whispers began, soft at first, then louder, like a chorus of tormented souls. "Turn back," the whispers begged, but Liam pressed on. "It's just the wind," he muttered, though his voice wavered. Then they saw her. From the mist emerged a figure, her long black hair dripping with water, her dress clinging to her skeletal frame. Her eyes were hollow voids, and in her hands, she held a skull that dripped with swamp water. The group froze, their courage evaporating under her gaze. "You dare disturb my waters?" she hissed, her voice a blend of sorrow and rage. The torches flickered and died, leaving only the pale moonlight to illuminate the horror. Liam stepped forward, clutching the talisman. "We mean no harm," he said, though his hands trembled. "We only want to end this curse." The lady's laugh echoed through the swamp, a sound so cold it seemed to freeze the air. "End the curse?" she mocked. "You cannot end what you do not understand." With a wave of her hand, the swamp came alive. The roots of the trees lashed out, ensnaring the villagers. The water churned violently as skeletal hands reached up, dragging them down into the depths. Liam struggled, the talisman glowing fiercely, but it was no use. One by one, his companions vanished beneath the surface, their screams muffled by the murk. Liam awoke to darkness. He was beneath the swamp, surrounded by the bones of countless victims. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the faint glow of bioluminescent algae cast eerie shadows on the walls of the underwater cavern. The lady stood before him, no longer resembling a human. Her face was a skull, her body draped in rotting, tattered fabric. The skull she held glowed faintly, and within its sockets flickered the trapped souls of her victims. "You will join them," she said, her voice echoing in his mind. "Your soul will fuel my wrath for eternity." Liam tried to move, but his body was paralyzed. The lady raised the skull, and a blinding light engulfed him. His screams joined the cacophony of voices trapped within, a new addition to her collection. The villagers who remained never saw Liam or the others again. On nights when the moon was full, they avoided the swamp, for they could hear the mournful cries of the lady's victims carried on the wind. The swamp claimed more lives as years passed, each soul adding to the lady's power. Her legend grew darker, her presence more sinister. Some said she could leave the swamp now, her influence spreading to the surrounding forests and even the village itself. Those brave or foolish enough to enter the swamp often spoke of statues, perfectly preserved figures of those who had entered before, their faces frozen in terror. These statues seemed to move when unobserved, their hollow eyes following intruders. To this day, the swamp remains a place of dread. The lady's laughter can still be heard on the wind, and her whispers call to the desperate, the grieving, and the foolhardy. They say that once you hear her voice, it's already too late. The swamp does not simply kill, it consumes. It twists the minds of those who enter, filling them with visions of their worst fears until they willingly walk into its depths. And when the lady emerges, it is not mercy she offers, but eternal torment. The skull she holds glows brighter with every soul she claims, a beacon of despair in the endless night. And so, the swamp waits, hungry and patient, for its next victim. Story 4. Whispers in the Mirror. Deep in the shadowy and ominous forest on the outskirts of the city, the blood-red house had long become a legend. No one dared to step foot near it except for those who were either too reckless or did not believe in the chilling tales. It was said to be the site of a horrifying massacre, and ever since then, anyone who entered the house vanished without a trace. The mirror in the living room was rumored to be the epicenter of the curse. People whispered that the mirror did not reflect the outside world, but instead revealed a blood-soaked face with blazing red eyes that seemed to burn into the soul of anyone who looked into it. Emma, a journalism student from the United States, was full of curiosity and passion for uncovering mysterious stories. When she heard about the blood-red house and the cursed mirror, she decided she had to uncover the truth. Despite warnings from her friends, Emma had an unshakable belief that these were just exaggerated myths meant to scare people. One particularly gloomy evening, Emma followed the winding path that led to the house. The forest seemed shrouded in a thick gray mist, with trees reaching out like clawed hands trying to snatch her away. The large wooden door creaked open unexpectedly, as though it had been waiting for someone to enter. Emma stepped over the threshold, and the air inside was damp, heavy with the stench of mold and decay. The mirror hung on a grimy stone wall, covered in dust and framed by an ornate border carved with grotesque patterns. As Emma approached, she could sense that this was no ordinary mirror. Her flashlight flickered and froze when it landed on the reflective surface. The image staring back at her was not her own. It was a distorted, monstrous figure with a twisted face and glowing red eyes that exuded menace. A cold voice emanated from the mirror. "You have come. Now you belong to me." Emma tried to turn around, but as she glanced back, she realized the house's entrance had vanished. The entire building was now an endless, suffocating void of darkness. Emma soon realized she was trapped within the mirror. Inside, she could see other faces, all bloodied and filled with despair. They stared back at her with hollow, haunting eyes. the eyes of souls stripped bare and imprisoned between realms. Outside, Emma's reflection had completely changed. She had become one of the spectral entities bound to the cursed mirror. Day after day, she waited for the next victim to step inside. By then, she was no longer the person she had once been. Time passed, and the blood-red house fell silent once again. Yet, anyone passing by could feel the piercing gaze of glowing red eyes watching them from the darkness of the mirror, as though beckoning them to come closer. Then one day, another young girl arrived. She was as curious as Emma had been, driven by a burning desire to uncover the truth. As the wooden door creaked open, a chilling laugh echoed from the mirror. "A new soul has arrived. Welcome." Story 5. The Tale of the Weeping Shadow. In the small, desolate village of Black Hollow, a chilling legend haunted the townsfolk. They spoke in hushed tones of the Weeping Shadow, a spectral figure that wandered the outskirts of the town under moonless skies. Her face, pale and emotionless, bore streaks of black tears that seemed to weep eternally, as though mourning a torment only she could understand. It was said that those who crossed her path never returned, their souls trapped within the void of her tears. Long ago, before Black Hollow became the forsaken place it was, there lived a woman named Lilith Vale. Lilith was an outcast, feared and hated by the villagers for her mysterious aura and rumored ties to witchcraft. She lived in a decrepit cabin deep in the woods, surrounded by strange herbs and symbols etched into the bark of ancient trees. One fateful day, a child from the village vanished without a trace. Desperate and angry, the villagers turned to Lilith, accusing her of sorcery and abduction. Despite her pleas of innocence, they dragged her into the center of town. That night, under the pale light of a crescent moon, they burned her at the stake. With her dying breath, Lilith uttered a curse. "I shall weep for the pain you have caused, and my tears will take everything you hold dear." As the flames consumed her, her blackened eyes seemed to pierce through the souls of the mob, and an icy wind swept through Black Hollow. From that night forward, Lilith Vale was no more. Only the Weeping Shadow remained. Decades passed, but the fear of the Weeping Shadow lingered. The villagers told tales of her haunting presence. She was often seen near the edge of the forest, her dark hood obscuring her face until one drew too close. It was then that her pale visage, streaked with black tears, was revealed, her hollow eyes drawing her victims into endless darkness. Alex, a skeptic and an outsider, arrived in Black Hollow to investigate the legend. A journalist by trade, Alex was determined to uncover the truth. Armed with a camera and a flashlight, he ventured into the forest one fateful evening, dismissing the villagers' warnings as mere superstition. The forest was eerily quiet, the air heavy with an unnatural chill. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist in impossible shapes, and the trees loomed like silent sentinels. Alex pressed on, his determination unwavering. As midnight approached, he reached a clearing. In the center stood a figure cloaked in black, motionless. "Who are you?" Alex called out, his voice trembling despite himself. The figure slowly turned, revealing the face of the Weeping Shadow. Her tears, like black rivers, glistened in the dim light. Her lips did not move, but a voice echoed in Alex's mind. "You seek the truth, but are you prepared to pay the price?" Alex stumbled backward, his flashlight flickering. He felt an overwhelming pull toward her, as if the void in her eyes demanded his very essence. Desperately, he tried to resist, but his body felt heavier with each passing second. The shadows around him seemed to grow, their whispers filling his ears with words he could not understand. The camera around his neck snapped a photo on its own, the flash briefly illuminating the clearing. For a moment, Alex thought he saw other faces in the darkness, faces of those who had vanished before him, their expressions frozen in terror. Summoning the last of his strength, Alex managed to turn and run. The forest seemed endless, the trees blurring together as his surroundings darkened. When he finally emerged, gasping for breath, the villagers were waiting. But something had changed. Their eyes widened in horror as they stared at Alex. He reached up to touch his face and felt the wet, sticky trails of black tears. "You've been marked," an elder whispered. "You belong to her now." From that day on, Alex was never the same. He stayed in Black Hollow, his face now bearing the streaks of the Weeping Shadow's curse. Each night, he would hear her whispers calling him back to the forest. And each night, he resisted, though he knew it was only a matter of time. The villagers watched in silence as Alex slowly faded, his eyes growing darker and his voice weaker. One morning, his cabin was found empty. No sign of struggle, no note, only the faint sound of weeping that lingered in the air. In the forest, the Weeping Shadow had a new companion. Those who dared to enter would now see two figures standing in the clearing. One cloaked in black, her tears eternal, and another, his face streaked with fresh black trails, forever weeping for the pain he could not escape. Years later, a new traveler arrived in Black Hollow. Intrigued by the stories, she ventured into the forest with a notebook and a recorder, determined to unravel the mystery of the Weeping Shadow. As she reached the clearing, she saw them, two figures standing side by side. The woman in black turned her head slightly, her hollow eyes meeting the traveler's gaze. Before the traveler could react, Alex stepped forward. His voice, though weak and sorrowful, carried a warning. "Leave now while you can. This forest hungers for souls, and once you've seen her face, it will never let you go." But curiosity burned too brightly in the traveler. She took a step closer, raising her recorder. The Weeping Shadow's lips curled into a faint, chilling smile. The forest grew deathly silent, and then the shadow surged forward, engulfing the traveler in an inky blackness. When the villagers found her belongings at the forest's edge the next day, her notebook contained only a single sentence scrawled in trembling handwriting. "The truth is in her tears, but the price is your soul." Story 6. The Harbinger of Storms. In the heart of an ancient land cursed by eternal storms, a sinister legend was whispered among the remnants of humanity. It spoke of the Harbinger, a skeletal figure cloaked in shreds of darkness, wielding the power to summon tempests that devoured everything in their path. Some called it a god of vengeance, others a herald of the apocalypse, but all agreed on one thing. Wherever the Harbinger appeared, death followed. The legend began in a time long forgotten, when the gods still walked the earth. A once proud kingdom defied the heavens, building a tower so tall it pierced the skies. This act of hubris angered the storm god, who sent his wrath in the form of an unstoppable storm that raged for 7 days and nights. When the tower finally crumbled, the storm god left behind his vengeful avatar, the Harbinger, to ensure no mortal dared challenge the heavens again. This avatar was neither alive nor dead, a skeletal being with hollow eyes that glowed with the light of a dying sun. Its voice was the howling wind, and its bony claws could rip apart both flesh and stone. As it roamed the land, the skies above it churned with black clouds, and the sound of thunder heralded its approach. Generations later, in the secluded village of Black Reef, the legend of the Harbinger had become a bedtime story meant to frighten disobedient children. The villagers lived in constant fear of the storms that swept through their lands, but none dared to connect them to the ancient legend. One fateful night, the skies darkened unnaturally early. The winds howled, and the villagers huddled in their homes, praying for the storm to pass. But amidst the thunder, a bone-chilling sound echoed through the air. A deep, guttural laughter that sent shivers down their spines. Anna, a defiant young woman with a penchant for challenging superstition, decided to investigate. Armed with nothing but a lantern and a knife, she ventured into the storm, determined to uncover the truth. As she reached the edge of the village, she saw it. A figure shrouded in swirling darkness, its skeletal face illuminated by the flashes of lightning. The Harbinger turned its hollow gaze toward her, and the storm seemed to intensify. Lightning struck mere feet away, and the wind threatened to tear her from the ground. Yet Anna stood her ground, shouting over the roar of the tempest. "Why are you here? What do you want from us?" The Harbinger raised a clawed hand, and the storm fell silent. Its voice, a mixture of wind and thunder, echoed in her mind. Mortals defied the heavens. Now they pay the price. Anna, trembling but resolute, refused to cower. We were not the ones who defied the heavens. Why should we suffer for the sins of the past? The Harbinger seemed to pause, as if considering her words. For the first time in centuries, its skeletal mouth curled into what could almost be called a grin. Mortals are bound by their ancestors' deeds, just as the storm is bound to me. But you are bold. Anna realized she had a chance, however slim, to save her people. What if I could offer you something in exchange for sparing my village? The Harbinger's hollow eyes flared. What could a mortal offer that would satisfy the wrath of the heavens? Myself, Anna said, her voice steady despite the terror in her heart. Take me as your servant. Spare the village and I will follow you. The Harbinger tilted its head, the storm swirling around them as if it were alive. A bold offer. Very well. Your life for theirs. Before Anna could react, the Harbinger extended its clawed hand, and a bolt of lightning struck her. When the light faded, Anna was gone. The storm receded, leaving the village untouched. The villagers, grateful but ignorant of Anna's sacrifice, rebuilt their lives, believing the storm had finally passed. But far away, in the eye of an endless tempest, Anna walked beside the Harbinger. She was no longer human. Her flesh had turned to shadow, and her eyes glowed with the same eerie light as her master's. Together they roamed the world, bringing the wrath of the heavens to those who dared defy the natural order. Yet within her, a spark of humanity remained, a spark that whispered of rebellion, of one day breaking free from the Harbinger's grasp. Decades passed, and the Harbinger's wrath grew ever more fearsome. Storms wiped entire cities from the map, and whispers of the skeletal figure cloaked in darkness spread like wildfire. But within the tempest, Anna plotted. She watched and waited, learning the secrets of the storm's power. Her humanity, though buried, had not been extinguished. One fateful night, as the Harbinger called forth a storm to destroy yet another defiant city, Anna made her move. Using the remnants of her mortal will, she seized control of the storm's energy, directing its fury toward her master. The Harbinger roared in rage, its skeletal form cracking as bolts of lightning struck it repeatedly. But the storm was not so easily tamed. As Anna fought to destroy the Harbinger, the tempest turned on her, consuming them both in a maelstrom of blinding light and deafening thunder. When the storm finally subsided, neither Anna nor the Harbinger remained. The land was left in eerie silence. The skies clear for the first time in centuries. The villagers of Black Reef believed the nightmare had ended. But on the darkest nights, when the wind whispered through the trees, some claimed to see a figure in the distance. A woman cloaked in shadow, her eyes glowing faintly. They said she wandered the land, neither mortal nor divine, searching for the remnants of her humanity. And deep in the heart of the storm, a skeletal hand clawed its way through the darkness, its hollow eyes blazing with vengeance. The Harbinger had not been destroyed, only reborn, more furious and vengeful than ever. The storm would come again, and when it did, it would spare no one. Story 7. The Ghostly Tales of Bengal. A journey into darkness. In the shadowed alleys and silent fields of Bengal, tales of ghosts and spirits have been passed down through generations. These legends are more than mere stories. They are warnings, etched into the cultural memory of the region. Among the most terrifying are the spirits of Pretni, Skondokata, Brahmadaitya, Shangchuni, Mamdoput, and Nishi. This is a tale that intertwines their chilling essence into one fateful night. It was a humid summer night in a remote village. Rahman, a skeptic who dismissed the supernatural as mere superstition, sat on his veranda, gazing into the dense, moonlit jungle nearby. He was known for challenging traditions and mocking elders' warnings about the spirits that wandered in the dark. That night, as the clock struck midnight, a whisper emerged from the forest. Rahman, it called, soft yet chilling. He froze, the hairs on his neck rising. It came again. Rahman. Though his instincts screamed at him to stay put, his arrogance pushed him to investigate. Just the wind, he muttered, stepping into the shadowy path leading to the forest. Little did he know, the Nishi, spirits that lured victims by calling their names, had begun its hunt. Deeper into the woods, Rahman felt a growing unease. The trees seemed to close in, and a strange, musty smell filled the air. He heard rustling behind him and turned to find nothing. Suddenly, the voice called again, louder this time. Rahman. It was said that the Nishi called a victim's name 3 times. Answering the third call was a death sentence. Determined not to respond, he quickened his pace. But the forest seemed endless, the path twisting and turning in impossible directions. That's when he saw her, a woman in white, standing eerily still, her feet turned backward. It was Pretni, the ghost of an unfulfilled soul. She stared at Rahman with hollow eyes, her face shifting between sorrow and rage. "Why do you disturb the night?" she whispered. Before he could answer, she vanished into the shadows, leaving behind the echo of her cries. Breathing heavily, Rahman stumbled onto a clearing. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. From the edge of the clearing emerged a Skondokata, the headless ghost. The creature carried its severed head in its hands, its mouth twisted in an eternal scream. The Skondokata moved swiftly, its head swiveling to face Rahman. He ran, his heart pounding as the ghost's guttural groans filled the air. The legend was true. Disturbing a Skondokata incurred its wrath. He barely escaped, diving into the thick underbrush. Rahman crawled through the underbrush, his mind racing. Ahead, a faint glow appeared. He approached cautiously, finding a Brahmadaitya seated cross-legged beneath a banyan tree. This ghost of a wise Brahmin seemed calm, its skeletal frame illuminated by an otherworldly light. "Why are you here, mortal?" the Brahmadaitya asked in a hollow voice. Desperate, Rahman pleaded for guidance. The ghost tilted its head and spoke. "You trespass in a realm not meant for the living. To survive, you must respect the balance. Flee before it's too late." Rahman nodded, gratitude filling his chest, but the Brahmadaitya's warning hung heavy in the air. As dawn neared, Rahman thought he was safe. He stumbled upon a pond, its waters reflecting the faint glow of the approaching sun. There, a woman adorned in shimmering bangles and a crimson sari appeared. She smiled sweetly, beckoning him closer. Rahman hesitated, remembering the tales of Shankchuni, the ghost of a married woman who preyed on the living. Her beauty was a trap, and her hunger for vengeance was insatiable. He turned to run, but the Shankchuni was already behind him, her bony fingers clawing at his arm. "Stay!" she hissed, her face contorting into a monstrous visage. Using all his strength, Rahman broke free, plunging into the dense forest once more. Exhausted and terrified, Rahman collapsed at the edge of the forest. The village was in sight, safety within reach. But as he took a step forward, the voice came again. "Rahman." This was the third and final call of the Nishi. Unable to resist, Rahman turned toward the voice. The forest fell silent, the air thick with dread. In that moment, the Nishi revealed itself, a swirling mass of shadows with eyes like burning coals. It engulfed him, its laughter echoing into the night. The villagers found Rahman's body at the forest's edge the next morning. His face was frozen in terror, blackened streaks trailing from his eyes. No one spoke of what they saw, for they knew the spirits had claimed him. From that night onward, the forest grew darker, its legends more menacing. The Pretni, Skondokata, Brahmadaitya, Shankchuni, Mamdobhut, and Nishi became more than stories. They were the guardians of the cursed woods, ensuring that no living soul disturbed the balance again. And when the wind carried the faint sound of a name being called, the villagers knew better than to answer. Story 8. The Smoking Sister. The convent of St. Dismas stood isolated on the edge of a dense, misty forest. Its towering spires and Gothic architecture cast long, ominous shadows across the surrounding fields. Once a place of serene devotion, it had become shrouded in whispers of dark secrets and forbidden rituals. The nuns within were known for their piety, but one sister, Sister Lucia, stood apart. Unlike her peers, Sister Lucia was a figure of contradiction. Her pale skin was adorned with intricate tattoos, macabre designs that coiled across her hands and arms. Her piercing eyes, framed by dark circles, seemed to see through the souls of those who crossed her path. Most unsettling of all, Sister Lucia was often seen smoking a cigarette in the cloister, her lips curling into a faint smirk as the smoke danced around her like ghostly tendrils. The villagers whispered of her enigmatic presence, calling her the Smoking Sister. They claimed that she bore the mark of something unholy, a cross etched into her forehead, glowing faintly under moonlight. They said she had made a pact with forces beyond comprehension. Years ago, before the convent's decline, Sister Lucia had been a devoted novice. But one fateful night, while exploring the catacombs beneath the convent, she discovered a hidden chamber. Inside, she found a dusty, leather-bound tome inscribed with forbidden symbols. The book spoke of a ritual that promised ultimate knowledge and power, but at a cost no mortal should bear. Consumed by curiosity, Lucia performed the ritual in secret. She lit black candles, drew the sigils in her own blood, and chanted the incantations. As the final words left her lips, the air grew cold, and a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It offered her power and enlightenment in exchange for her soul. Desperate for answers and tired of blind devotion, Lucia accepted. The entity marked her body with intricate tattoos, each a symbol of the knowledge she had gained. But it left her with a curse. She would forever straddle the line between holy and damned, unable to fully embrace either. After the ritual, the convent began to change. Strange occurrences plagued the halls. Candles flickered without wind, eerie whispers echoed in the chapel, and shadows moved where no light should cast them. The other nuns grew fearful of Sister Lucia, avoiding her gaze and speaking her name only in whispers. Yet they could not bring themselves to expel her, for they feared the wrath of whatever forces had claimed her. One by one, the sisters began to vanish. Their rooms were left undisturbed, their beds neatly made, but no trace of them remained. The villagers noticed the growing silence at the convent, and soon, no one dared approach its gates. Lucia, however, remained, a lone figure amidst the decay. Her smoking habit, a remnant of her former life, seemed to mock the solemnity of the place. Each puff of smoke carried whispers of the lost souls she had unwittingly damned. One stormy night, a young priest named Father Marcus arrived at the convent. Sent by the Vatican to investigate the rumors, he was determined to uncover the truth. He found Sister Lucia seated in the cloister, the glow of her cigarette illuminating her spectral tattoos. "I have come to cleanse this place of its darkness," Marcus declared, clutching his rosary. Lucia chuckled, a sound both melodic and sinister. "Cleanse?" she echoed. "You cannot cleanse what has already been claimed." Despite her warning, Marcus pressed on. He demanded to know the truth, and Lucia, weary of solitude, obliged. She led him to the catacombs, to the very chamber where she had performed the ritual. The air grew colder with each step, and the shadows seemed to come alive, reaching for them. As Marcus stood before the forbidden tome, he realized the magnitude of her mistake. The sigils glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. "This is blasphemy," he whispered. Lucia nodded. "And yet, it is truth." The entity that Lucia had summoned all those years ago was not content with her soul alone. It demanded more lives, more devotion. As Marcus recited prayers, the chamber began to tremble. The shadows coalesced into a monstrous form, its eyes burning with otherworldly fire. "Leave, Father," Lucia urged, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "This battle is mine." But Marcus refused. Together, they confronted the entity, Lucia wielding the power she had gained and Marcus drawing strength from his faith. The battle was fierce, the air thick with smoke and ash. The entity lashed out, its roars shaking the very foundation of the convent. In a final act of defiance, Lucia offered herself completely, channeling the darkness within her to banish the entity. The room exploded in blinding light, and when the dust settled, both Lucia and the entity were gone. The convent lay in ruins, its halls silent once more. Father Marcus returned to the Vatican, haunted by the memory of Sister Lucia's sacrifice. He carried with him a single artifact, her cigarette holder, engraved with the same intricate designs that had marked her skin. The villagers, now freed from the shadow of the convent, spoke of Lucia not as a monster, but as a tragic figure, a nun who had walked the line between salvation and damnation. But the story did not end there. On stormy nights, when the wind howled and the air smelled faintly of smoke, villagers reported seeing a figure in the ruins of the convent. She stood cloaked in shadow, her tattoos glowing faintly, her cigarette burning like a dying star. Those who dared approach claimed to hear her voice, soft and menacing. "Do you seek the truth? Then come closer and pay the price." One villager, lured by her haunting beauty, ventured too close. The next morning, his body was found in the forest, his skin marked with the same tattoos that had adorned Lucia. His eyes were wide open, his face frozen in an expression of unspeakable terror. The smoking sister had become something more than a cautionary tale. She was now the guardian of forbidden knowledge, a revenant bound by the curse she had unleashed. And her story, though tragic, was far from over. For those who sought her, one truth remained. In the smoke of her cigarette, the line between heaven and hell would blur, and no soul could escape the pull of her unholy gaze. Story: 9 Whispers in the Shadows. It was a crisp autumn evening when the Johnson family moved into the old two-story house at the end of Willow Lane. The house, though spacious and quaint, carried an air of eerie silence. 10-year-old Daniel, wide-eyed and curious, found himself drawn to his new bedroom on the second floor. The room had large windows that overlooked the woods and a tall, old wardrobe that seemed to loom in the corner like a silent guardian. From the first night, Daniel felt uneasy. Shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and twist, even when there was no light to cast them. He told his parents, but they dismissed it as an overactive imagination. "You'll get used to it, Danny," his father assured him. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. One night, as Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he heard faint whispers. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. He sat up, clutching his blanket, and glanced around the room. The wardrobe door creaked open slightly, though he was certain he had closed it before bed. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling. The whispers stopped. Summoning his courage, Daniel tiptoed toward the wardrobe. As he reached out to close the door, a chilling gust of air escaped from inside. He peered into the dark void but saw nothing. Yet, as he backed away, he felt eyes, many eyes, watching him. That night, he dreamt of shadowy figures surrounding his bed, their glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. When he woke, he found faint scratches on the floorboards near his bed. Over the next few days, Daniel's fear grew. The whispers became louder, more distinct, though he couldn't understand the words. Shadows danced across his walls, even when the room was bathed in sunlight. The air grew colder each night, and the feeling of being watched became unbearable. One night, Daniel awoke to the sound of his name being whispered, softly at first, then louder, more insistent. He sat up, frozen in fear. Across the room, near the wardrobe, stood a figure, tall and shrouded in darkness. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its outstretched hand beckoned him. Daniel screamed, and the figure dissolved into the shadows. His parents rushed into the room, but when he told them what he had seen, they dismissed it as a nightmare. But Daniel knew it wasn't. On the 7th night in the house, Daniel woke to find his room filled with shadowy figures. They floated above the floor, their ghostly forms writhing like smoke. Their glowing eyes stared at him, unblinking as they whispered in unison. "Come with us, Daniel." He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. The largest of the figures reached out, its skeletal fingers inches from his face. The shadows began to close in, enveloping him in cold, suffocating darkness. Just as he felt himself slipping away, a burst of light filled the room. The shadows recoiled, hissing, and retreated into the walls. Daniel gasped for air as the light faded. He realized it had come from the old family locket his grandmother had given him, now glowing faintly on his nightstand. The next morning, Daniel confided in his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Hawkins, who had lived in the town for decades. Her expression darkened when he described the shadows. "That house," she began, her voice trembling. "It's cursed. Decades ago, a family disappeared from there without a trace. Some say their souls were claimed by the shadows that haunt it. They prey on children, drawing strength from their fear." Mrs. Hawkins handed Daniel a small vial of salt and a piece of blessed chalk. "Draw a circle around your bed tonight. It won't stop them forever, but it might buy you some time." That night, Daniel did as Mrs. Hawkins instructed. As the clock struck midnight, the shadows returned, more numerous and aggressive than before. They slammed against the invisible barrier of the salt circle, their whispers turning to guttural growls. "Your light won't save you forever," the largest shadow hissed. "We will claim you." Summoning his courage, Daniel clutched the glowing locket and shouted, "Leave me alone." The locket's light grew blinding, forcing the shadows to retreat once more. But Daniel knew this was only a temporary victory. The Johnsons moved out of the house shortly after, unable to explain the strange occurrences. Yet Daniel was never the same. He would often wake in the middle of the night, convinced the shadows had followed him. And perhaps they had. For years later, on moonless nights, Daniel would still hear the whispers, soft, insistent, and growing ever closer. "Come with us, Daniel." And one night, he did. Story 10. The Cursed Chronicle. In the depths of an ancient library, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten tomes, a scholar named Elias stumbled upon a peculiar manuscript. Its parchment was yellowed with age, bordered with intricate designs of skeletal motifs and Gothic floral patterns. Skulls adorned each corner, their hollow eyes seemingly watching whoever dared approach. Elias felt an inexplicable pull to the manuscript. There were no words on its pages, only blank spaces surrounded by the macabre border. Yet the air around it seemed heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Whispers brushed against his ears, too faint to understand but impossible to ignore. Ignoring the unease prickling his skin, Elias placed the manuscript in his satchel. A historical artifact, he told himself, though his heart thudded heavily in his chest. That night, Elias brought the manuscript to his study, setting it carefully on his desk. He lit a candle, its flickering flame casting eerie shadows across the room. As he prepared to examine the blank pages, something changed. Words began to appear on the parchment, as though written by an invisible hand. The ink was dark and wet, forming jagged letters that seemed to writhe on the page. Elias leaned closer, his breath hitching as he read, "To the one who awakens me, each page you fill shall steal a soul." Elias recoiled, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His rational mind dismissed it as a trick, an illusion caused by exhaustion. Yet, as he reached to close the manuscript, the borders glowed faintly and the whispers grew louder. Over the following days, Elias couldn't shake the presence of the manuscript. It seemed to call to him, its blank pages begging to be filled. One evening, in a moment of weakness, he took up his pen and wrote his own name on the first page. The moment the ink dried, a bone-chilling scream echoed through his study. The skulls on the border seemed to shift, their hollow eyes burning with an unholy light. The words beneath his name bled into existence. "Elias, the first to awaken, shall serve as witness." The air grew colder, and a shadowy figure materialized before him. It was skeletal, draped in tattered black robes, its bony fingers clutching a quill that dripped with ink as dark as night. Its hollow voice echoed in Elias's mind. "You have begun the chronicle of shadows. For each name you inscribe, a life will be taken, and a piece of your soul with it." Terrified, Elias swore never to touch the manuscript again. But the power it promised was intoxicating. The figure whispered temptations into his dreams, showing him visions of wealth, power, and immortality. All if he continued to write. Unable to resist, Elias wrote the name of a rival scholar who had stolen his work years before. Within hours, news arrived. The rival had died suddenly, his face contorted in terror. The manuscript's border expanded slightly, the floral patterns curling into more skulls. The whispers praised him, urging him to write more. Each name brought death, and each death filled Elias with both dread and a twisted sense of power. But with each inscription, he felt a piece of himself slipping away. His reflection grew gaunt, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling with a cold he could not shake. As the manuscript grew heavier with names, Elias realized the border had changed dramatically. The floral patterns were gone, replaced entirely by writhing bones and hollow-eyed skulls. The parchment glowed faintly, pulsating as though alive. Desperate to end the curse, Elias sought out ancient texts, searching for a way to destroy the manuscript. He discovered a chilling truth. The Chronicle of Shadows could not be destroyed by mortal hands. It was a creation of the unseen, a realm where souls were harvested to fuel unspeakable powers. The only way to end the curse was to write the name of the one who had awakened it. But Elias knew that doing so would condemn his soul entirely, binding him to the Chronicle for eternity. Elias's health deteriorated rapidly. The whispers had become deafening, the skulls on the border now leering at him with malicious glee. Shadows moved in his peripheral vision, and he felt the cold grip of unseen hands on his shoulders. With trembling hands, he took up his pen for the final time. Tears streamed down his face as he wrote his own name on the last blank page. The room plunged into darkness, the candle extinguished by an unseen force. The skeletal figure reappeared, its empty gaze locking onto Elias. "Your sacrifice is complete," it intoned. "The Chronicle is yours to bear." Elias screamed as his body dissolved into shadow, his soul consumed by the manuscript. The Chronicle of Shadows snapped shut, its pages blank once more, the border gleaming with fresh, intricate skulls. Decades later, the manuscript was discovered again, this time in the dusty attic of an old estate. A young woman named Clara found it, marveling at its ornate design. As she flipped through its blank pages, she felt a strange pull, a whisper brushing against her ear. "Will you write your story?" And so, the Chronicle of Shadows awaited its next victim, the cycle beginning anew.